was a little boy, and he was, probably about Walter's age. It wasn't Walter. I'm not telling stories on other people's kids. I barely tell stories on my own kids, at least not without their permission. But this little boy was really excited on this hot summer morning because his mom had given him a big bowl of grapes. And at this particular point in his life, grapes were his favorite food. And on a summer morning, I'm not sure he's wrong. Grapes are sweet and juicy and cold and the perfect kind of snack for a warm summer morning. And so he had this bowl kind of filled to the brim with grapes. And as he was holding it and trying to figure out how to navigate the door to get out onto the porch, his dad came by, plucked one right off the vine and popped it in his mouth. The little boy put the bowl down, turned, put his hands on his hips just exactly the way he'd seen his mother do a time or two, and said, "Hey, now I only have a lot." I can't help but think of that story when I read this text of the parable that Jesus tells about the farmer whose land produces abundantly and causes him to begin to dream about pulling down his barns to build bigger barns to store even more. But first, we have this bad habit with the parables of diving right into the parable itself as if Jesus told these stories in a vacuum. He's just walking down the road and one day he begins a story out of the blue about a man whose land produces abundantly. And that's not the case. In the case of all of the parables that Jesus tells, there is a prompt, a something that happens that the parable is in response to. And we lose something of the meaning of the parable when we rush past the setup to get into the story. So the setup for this parable is that one day while Jesus was teaching, a man came to him and said, "Jesus, tell my brother to divide my father's land with me, to divide up the inheritance." Now, this story I will tell on my children because it's generic and not pointed at one of them. I'm in a stage of life where I hear a lot of, "Tell my brother." Now, they don't say it that way. "Will you tell Charles? Will you tell James? Will you tell William?" No, I don't want to. But there's a lot of that. We play a lot of referee in our house right now. But I will also tell you that I've seen a lot of adults struggle to get along with their siblings, struggle to make decisions about their parents' long-term care in their older years, about what to do with the family farm, about how they should take care of their parents' house when it's time for them to move out, about how the money or the car or whatever else should be broken up and distributed, about what should be done with the long-term investments that their parents held, about who should be paying what and who's already received their inheritance and help and loan from their parents along the way, about all of these things that start to break apart the relationship. And so I find it interesting the way that Jesus approaches this question. This man comes and he says, "Jesus, tell my brother to divide up the inheritance with me." And instead of getting into the content, instead of Jesus saying, "Okay, well, let's talk about what the situation is. Who's the oldest? What does the law say? What have you received from your parents already? What's the issue? What are we not agreeing on?" Jesus sees a deeper need, a deeper problem. Jesus sees someone or two someones who've chosen to prioritize things over people, who are allowing possessions to take the place of relationships. He sees the potential for these two brothers to lose everything over who will get what percentage. And so he speaks a word of caution. Remember when I was, well, some of you can't remember because you weren't here, so let me back up. A little while ago, I preached on the Beatitudes. And in particular, what I call the negative Beatitudes, the ones that say, woe to you when. And I retranslated that a little bit, that perhaps Jesus was offering a word of caution. Be careful. And so you may notice that in this translation we read here, that's exactly part of Jesus' response to this young man. Be careful that you don't allow the wrong things the place of priority in your life. Be careful that you don't let stuff and finances and money eat away at relationships. Be careful. Take a good look at what you stand to lose in order to gain a portion of the inheritance. And then Jesus tells the story of the farmer whose land is producing well, and he looks out and he says, what a problem. My barns aren't big enough to hold all of this. But it's okay. I know what I will do. I'm going to tear down that barn and I'm going to build a bigger barn. And then when that barn is full, then I will feel secure. I'll be able to say to my soul, soul, you have everything you need. Soul, all your problems have gone away. Soul, you're done working and you can eat and drink and rest and be merry. You can kick up your feet and never worry about another thing. Do you hear what makes the rich man foolish? I'm not convinced that what makes him foolish is the abundance that he has. I think what makes him foolish, and this is what hurts because it hits home a little more than I'd like to admit, is that fantasy that when we get enough, or when we hit such and such goal, or when we have a certain amount in the bank, or when we have our own home, or when we get the home paid off, or when we move into a bigger place, or when we finally have the newest iPhone, or when we have a good and reliable car, or when we have an educational fund for our kids, or when the retirement account hits a certain amount, you can fill in whatever blank you want there. When I manage to acquire this, it's going to solve everything. I'm going to be able to relax. I am going to be able to feel secure, and my worries are going to go away. Now, this is one of those things that the great part of having kids is that you preach it yourself every time you preach at your kids. And so every time I catch myself telling my kids that there will always be more and there will always be something newer and shinier and fancier and with cooler gizmos on it, I have to hear myself say it out loud. That every time you think that you've got the full collection, you find out there's something else out there. In our house right now, the newest rage is that they've released a new kind of Paw Patrol. And so now suddenly the complete collection of all the dogs, that's a dog cartoon on the Nickelodeon family of networks, for those of you who don't have small children at home anymore. And they're beginning to do the thing that Power Rangers did when I was a kid, where every year or so there's a brand new form. We started with Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and then there were all of these, and I think there's like 25 different kinds of Power Rangers now. Paw Patrol's starting to do the same thing. But I'm watching in my house as suddenly these toys that last November they couldn't live without are okay, I guess, but the new ones are so cool. And I say that, but let me be clear. I have also done that as an adult, not over Paw Patrol. It looked like this. When Ross and I moved to Chicago, we rented an apartment in a neighborhood called Rogers Park on the north edge of Chicago, almost to Evanston. And the great thing about Rogers Park is that real estate is cheaper there than it is in most parts of Chicago. There's lots of reasons for that, and it made for a colorful experience while we were there, and I loved every minute of it. But I learned quickly that no matter how awesome your apartment was, and let me be clear, I lived in an apartment 2 times the size of my classmates who lived in the Evanston apartments that the seminary owns, because real estate was that much cheaper in our neighborhood. So we had about 1,100 square feet, and most of our friends were living in 500 to 600 square feet. But this thing would happen where Saturdays and Sundays were open house days for apartments. And so Ross and I, even though we had an amazing deal, the square footage and the quality of the building that we lived in was unbelievable for what we paid for it. And we had a parking spot. Okay, and that's like serious jackpot when it comes to Chicago real estate. So we had a parking spot, but I would do this thing where we would start cruising those listings, especially when it got to be around June or July, because our lease started in August each year. And you start to get that feeling that maybe there's a better apartment out there. Ooh, this one has granite countertops. Oh, that one has a built-in food disposal, you know, in the dish disposal thing in the sink. We didn't have one of those in my building because it was too old. Oh, in-unit washer and dryer. Not to have to haul our stuff down to the basement and fight with our fellow tenants for washer and dryer space. And we would start to think that there was something better out there. Now, the truth was, there wasn't anything better out there for what our budget allowed. But I noticed that that's just a part of who we are. We're always looking at what somebody else has. You can actually even watch young parents do this when you're out at like a park or an amusement park kind of setting, or someplace where everybody's got their strollers out. And Ross and I used to do this, and I've heard other parents do it, where you're walking by and you see somebody else's stroller and you're like, oh, did you see that? Their stroller has a built-in speaker that you can plug your phone into, so you're not just using the cup holder to amplify your music. Oh, did you see the bag, the diaper bag that clips onto their stroller so it's not like knocking it over? It's all secure and stuff. All of these little features and stuff, and you start comparing and thinking somebody else has got something better. And we begin to tell ourselves this story that when I can afford that, when I have this much built up in savings, and not only do we tell ourselves this story, but actually the world is telling us this story. If you watch any of the morning news shows, Good Morning America, Today Show, it doesn't really, CBS Today, whatever those morning shows are, you won't go a full 2-week cycle without there being at least one segment on how you could better be utilizing your finances to build up a bigger savings for emergencies, or how to better invest your money in the stock market, or how to make better use of the educational programs where you can save up money for your kids' college, or how you can do a better job of financing your vehicles or your house or whatever. There's all, and it's important information. Those of us who are not naturally financially gifted appreciate that information, but the overarching message we get when that's coming at us all the time is, if you can save up enough, if you can put enough in the right places, then you'll relax. Then you'll feel secure. Then you'll be safe. Then everything will be okay. And I think that's part of what Jesus cautions us against with this parable, is against the foolishness, not just of acquiring for the sake of acquiring. There's plenty of jokes out there about how you never see a hearse carrying a U-Haul behind it because you can't take it with you. But of the foolishness of believing that our security And our sense of well-being comes from having enough stashed away. To the extent that we choose our storage over our relationships. And I wonder how different it would look if the farmer in Jesus' parable had looked out on the abundance of the crops on his land and said, "Oh, my barn isn't big enough to store all this. I wonder who else I could bless. I wonder what relationships I could strengthen. I wonder who else's security I could uplift. I wonder how I could make my community, my village, my network, my people stronger because of the ways that my land has produced. I wonder who else I could give a little peace of mind to. I wonder who could share with me in the abundance that I have received." You know, our denominational founder, John Wesley, has lots of sort of short ways of summing up some rules for ways of living. And one of the ones that has endured the test of time is that he was known for teaching people to earn all you can, to save all you can, and to give all you can. And I like to joke that sometimes we get stuck after that second one, right? We do the earn all you can and the save all you can, but then it's a little harder to do the give all you can. And I need to share that for John Wesley, that was not like a separate step. They were one fluid motion, right? That the purpose that drove the earning and the saving was in order to be able to share. He had the story about having been a young college student and having splurged on himself on a painting for his apartment. And that the very night he hung that painting on the wall, a woman came in desperate need, with inadequate clothing for the winter weather, begging for a little help to be able to afford some shelter or some warmer clothes. And he was unable to help her. And he said he spent the rest of the night looking at that painting, feeling as though he had robbed the woman who came to his door in order to decorate his walls. And it changed his spending habits for the rest of his life. He really was driven that all of his spending be in generosity, that it be used to help others, to strengthen the community, to build relationships. And I believe that that's part of what Jesus is talking about when Jesus says that the man died, having stored up earthly things, but not having been rich toward God. That being rich toward God is not about having a certain pattern of prayer life or a certain devotional pattern that somebody else sets for you. It's not about how many times a year you manage to get your backside into the pew of a church. It's not about all of those things matter, but they all matter in helping us build up this idea of being rich toward God, because being rich toward God is being able to look at the world more like the way God looks at the world. It's being able to see our blessings not as our blessings and a source of our personal security, but as a means by which to uplift and to strengthen our community and our neighbors and our brothers and sisters. It's about being able to choose relationship because we treasure one another. Remembering that those we see, including when we look in the mirror, are beloved children of God, are those whom God treasures more deeply than God treasures any offering we bring, more deeply than God treasures any gold or silver or beautiful buildings or stained glass windows or endowment funds or program ministries. Those we see are what God treasures most. Being rich toward God necessarily entails being rich in relationship and stewarding our relationships with one another. Being rich toward God is not about not having material things, but about seeing those material things not as the ends unto themselves, but as a means of strengthening relationships and blessing others. And I remember that Jesus speaks words of caution, not in order to point a finger and wag it like my grandmother used to do when we did things that were displeasing to her. That's the fiercest she actually got, was the finger wag, so I can't complain too much. But not to wag a finger and make people feel ashamed about what they own, but as an invitation to begin to view what we have, not with a false sense of security, not with a goal, a fantasy goal of ever being satisfied, but as a means by which we can build up our real treasure, which is a relationship with a God who created us in love, and with our brothers and sisters in Christ, whom God also loves and treasures. And for that, I give thanks to God. Amen.